Hey everybody, welcome back to the freeze drying room. If this is your first time here, my name is Brian. I run this YouTube channel called Live Life Simple. We do freeze drying on this channel. And today we're doing a video that I've been waiting a very long time to do. We're gonna do a head-to-head competition of all of the pumps. We're gonna start with the standard pump that comes with all freeze dryers. We're gonna do the first upgraded pump, which is the Premier oiled pump. And then last, we're gonna do the big dog, top of the line, upgraded oilless pump. So today we're going to go over the specs of each pump. I'm going to give you pros and cons of each pump. I have used all three and I've owned all three now for a while, so I can give you my honest opinion. I have nothing to gain or to lose, so I'm going to shoot you straight. I'm going to show you how much electricity each pump uses. We're going to do a race to see who can get the fastest vacuum of each three pumps. I'm going to show you how loud or how quiet each is. And then I'm going to give you my final thoughts on all three pumps. So if you've been shopping on Harvestright's website, you'll notice one thing is missing here, and that would be the other option of oilless pump. I do not have those because they ship with small and medium freeze dryers, and I have a large. So I'm just testing the tried and true oilless pump. They've been selling this for several years now. So throughout the video, you're gonna see this screen right here when I'm just showing some specs. The first thing we're going to do is go over some specs of each pump. The first thing I'm going to do are weight comparisons, because depending on your situation, that might be a factor. First up is the standard pump. Our weight of the standard pump is 36 pounds, almost 37 pounds. And then our next contestant is the Premier pump. I've really grown to love this Premier pump. I've owned two of them now and I've loved both of them. The weight of this, 34.6 pounds. And then last up, this oilless pump, and I'm not gonna lie to you, this thing is like a cinder block, 44.4 pounds. The next thing we're going to go over are just the quick measurements and the general specs of each pump. You can see side by side, they're relatively close, but this one's obviously vertical, these are horizontal. Our standard pump at the longest measurements, the longest is about 17 inches, right around 10 inches tall, and 6 inches at the width. Pump at the very longest is right about 16 and a half, 12 inches tall to the top of that handle, and about 5 3/4 inches wide. So you can see the oilless pump, it's a totally different silhouette. This at its tallest point is right about 18 and a half inches. And then depending on which way you have it sitting, the widest point is about 10 inches on either side. While we're talking about space and the area that your pump is going to end up in, the deciding factor also might be the amount of heat that these put out. All these pumps do put out a pretty good amount of heat. With the oil pumps, a lot of that heat is managed through the oil, which is the advantage of the oiled pumps, whereas the oilless pump is completely oilless, obviously. So the amount of heat that this puts out is quite a bit more. So if you have it in a tight, confined space, this pump is probably not for you. Next, I just want to go over some quick general specs of these pumps. They're all going to be 7 CFM vacuum pumps, but there are a few differences between the pumps. Both of the available oiled pumps are 3/4 horsepower, but the standard pump is a 15 micron. This Premier pump is a 4 micron. And the biggest difference between these two is the ability to filter the oil. The Premier pump also has an onboard DC inverter, which makes it much more quiet and it makes it much more efficient. But we're going to get to that in a little bit. I want to just give you a quick shot of the tags for each one so you can see. And before I move on to the oilless pump, I just want to show you a couple of the differences between these two pumps, what would justify the cost difference. The Premier pump is a $700 upgrade, but I kind of want to show you why that would be. Both of these oiled pumps do require oil changes, but one of the first big differences in these two oiled pumps is the frequency of oil changes. This standard pump is going to require an oil change every 3 to 5 batches in your freeze dryer. This Premier pump is actually, it can go up to 25, sometimes even more than that in between oil changes. The big difference is just the way that this filters the oil. It dissipates any water that gets in the oil, keeps the oil a lot cleaner. And I mentioned earlier that this actually has a DC motor, which makes it quite a bit more quiet than the standard pump. But we're going to get to that because we're going to do a sound test for all 3 of these pumps, and I think you'll really see the difference between these 2 pumps. Let's go to the oilless. Output is 550 watts. We're going to compare that with all of the pumps as well so we can see really how efficient or inefficient each of these pumps are. So I think what we need to do next is just to see how efficient each one of these pumps are, or inefficient. We want to see the amps that they're pulling, we want to see the wattage that they're using, and in order to do that we're going to use our kilowatt meter. First up is going to be our standard pump. You can see we're zeroed out. Next up, the almighty Premier pump. You can see we're zeroed out. Let's get this thing started. You can see it's dropping in wattage very quickly once it gets started. We're going to let this mellow out a little bit so we can get a real wattage out of it. And it just keeps dropping in wattage. It gets more efficient as it gets going. So it's really just kind of hovering around the 260, 270 watt range. Let's see what the amp is like. 3.2 amps. And now it's dropping into the 240 wattage range. So last but not least, we're going to do our oilless pump. We're zeroed out. And don't be alarmed when I turn this on. This is the normal sound. And it does mellow out after a bit of time, but it's a little bit alarming when you first hear it. It's really just been hovering around 450 to 460 watts. Amps are about 4.4. It's had some time running now. It's dipping down into the 430s. And then still right around 4.3 amps. But really what I'm most curious about is to how it will pull a vacuum in comparison to the other pumps. Next we're going to measure how fast or how slow each of these pumps can get to 1500 millitorrs. So let's do that right now. So we're about a minute and a half. We're still at 18,000 millitors. 5 minutes and 1 second. There goes the standard pump. So I want to mention that when these pumps start, they're quite a bit louder than when they mellow out, when they kind of get all the oil run through them, whatever. The oilless pump is actually the same way, where it's very loud on startup, but they do tend to chill out. They're more efficient once they get running, and they're quieter, and they really just start performing better. So there's the 1 minute mark right at about 21,000. So this is actually going much faster than I thought it was. We're at 1645 right now. We're really close to 1500. Once we hit that, I'll click this done button and that clock will stop for us. So we ended up at 3 minutes and 55 seconds. It's going to start up, and even on startup it's really quiet. And that will tone down here in a second. And you can see just after a minute we're down to 19,000 already. We're getting real close. We're at 3.5 minutes now. 4 minutes and 5 seconds. And I do want to mention you can go to a lot lower millitorr, a lot lower pressure, but it really takes a very long time to get down to like 500 or 300. What I'm doing today is just getting down to that 1500. It shows that initial quick vacuum, the power of the pump. So now that we've seen that, let's see how quiet or how loud each pump is. I'm going to use a real decibel meter. I'm going to measure from about 4 feet away from the pump, and then we're going to go all the way outside the room. We're going to close this door and see how loud it is outside of the freeze drying room, probably about 20 feet away with the door closed. This is really where the Premier pump outshines all of the pumps, and as soon as I stop talking, you can see why. You really cannot even hear anything going on in there. Obviously, if the freeze dryer itself was on, you'd have a little bit more noise, but the pump itself is so quiet. I really want to encourage you to do some research on how decibels are measured as well, because even though some of these are only a few decibels apart, each decibel that you go up the difference is huge. So keep that in mind. And I would imagine you can tell the difference just by the amount of background noise and how you can hear me over background noise. I'm going to leave you with my final thoughts on each pump, because to me this is the most important decision that you will make in the freeze dryer, other than choosing the size of freeze dryer. And in order to make that choice, you need to separate yourself into one of two camps. And we're not talking about donkeys and elephants here. We're talking about oiled pumps or oilless pumps. And both the standard and the Premier pump are going to require oil maintenance, which means oil changes using a filtration system like this, or at least some kind of oil change if you're not going to filter. But that doesn't mean that the oilless is completely maintenance free. Even though the oilless pump is considered a maintenance-free pump, it does require maintenance. This does have to be rebuilt after a certain amount of hours. I've also found it helpful to let this run after my cycle is done for a while, just to kind of blow out any type of moisture or whatever is in here. Otherwise, the water, the condensation, all the goop kind of tries to settle to the bottom of this. And I've noticed that throughout the time of using this, that this check valve right here tends to blow a lot of gunk out. So let's start with this standard pump. First and foremost, this pump is a gigantic upgrade from the old pump that used to come standard with the Harvestrights. And there is nothing wrong with this pump. It comes as the standard pump. It's just the default pump unless you upgrade. Just not having to change oil every single batch is a huge upgrade in this pump. This pump can also use a variety of different types of oils, which could be an advantage in its own way. And if you ever have problems with this pump, the cost of replacing it is very little. I think that like $250 to $350 to replace this pump completely. If you rebuild it, it could be even less than that. This pump is also quite a bit quieter than the old style pump. You saw the results compared to the oilless and the Premier. So really, this pump is basically free with the purchase of the freeze dryer, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with it. But I will get to the cons right now. The biggest negatives of this standard pump are the amount of noise that it puts out, which maybe that's not even a factor for you, and the frequency of oil changes. Every 3 to 5 cycles, you're changing the oil completely in this thing. You're draining it, and you're either getting rid of the oil or you're filtering it, and you're putting new oil in. And depending on what you're freeze drying, it could be more often than that. But to play devil's advocate on that, an oil change only takes about 2 minutes from start to finish. It's very quick, especially if you have something that can filter it quickly like this, or like our other system over here. Now let's move on to the almighty Premier. It's no secret if you've watched this channel for a while, I love this pump for a lot of reasons. The quality of this pump is amazing. It's made by a very well-known pump company, vacuum pump company. They're very expensive pumps to buy. So really the fact that you can upgrade this for $700 above the standard pump is a deal if you knew how much one of these pumps costs. And kind of going along with the quality of the build of this pump, it also just sounds like good quality. It's quiet with that DC motor. It's very, very efficient, and it just it's so smooth sounding in comparison to the other two pumps. And for me, I just can't say enough good things about this pump, but there are some bad things about this pump. The most obvious being that it's still an oiled pump, so it does require oil maintenance. You do have to do oil changes on this pump. However, the frequency, or I should say infrequency, of oil changes every 20 to 25 batches on this, it's really, to me, it's not that big a deal, because even if you're running your freeze dryer 24 hours, 7 days a week from start to finish with the time to allow for defrosting the freeze dryer, you're really getting probably close to 2 months worth of use on one single oil change in this thing, which seems so infrequent that you almost forget to change the oil. You have to remind yourself to change the oil. The oil is almost always crystal clear in mine. In fact, I think since I started using this, I've probably only changed the oil 2 times, I think. But it's not all lollipops and gumdrops for this pump. One of the most annoying things of this pump is it turns water that gets into the oil into water vapor, and it kind of puts a smoke screen out throughout your whole room at certain points of the batch. Sometimes it'll go through a batch without doing it at all, but sometimes it looks like an 80s rock video in your freeze drying room. But for this pump, that's a necessary evil. It's separating that water vapor from the oil, which is why you don't have to change the oil very often. So last, let's finish this off with the oilless pump. The biggest obstacle of this oilless pump is you're already spending a huge chunk of money on a freeze dryer, and it's a really tough pill to swallow to buck up another $1,500. And even though this is not considered maintenance free, it's really easy to get used to just not having to screw with any of this oil stuff right here. Of the 3 pumps, I've used the oilless the least, and it is really easy to get used to just starting the machine and not having to mess with one more thing with the oil and whatnot. It just fires up and you're on your way. But the longevity of this pump is a big concern for a lot of people, and having to send this thing in over a certain amount of time, every 3,000 hours or whatever, is a big concern for a lot of people. Another concern for the oilless pump that I do have is that it puts off a lot of heat. If it's not put in a properly ventilated area, it could cause some issues. It really heats up this room. There are certain circumstances where you have to have an oilless pump, just if you're processing food, or if you're doing pharmaceutical things or scientific laboratory type things. You might have to have this oilless pump, just depending on your requirements for what you're freeze drying. 2 more concerns I have with the oilless pump, and I don't want you to think that I'm just sounding gripey about the oilless. It has lots of benefits in its own right. The first one is the startup noise that this thing makes. It sounds like a duck call, and it's a little off-putting. It took a while to even get used to it because it sounds like something's wrong with it when it starts up. But that's the norm. But even after it gets warmed up, it is still pretty loud. The type of sound that it puts out is a lot more industrial sounding, so that might be a concern for you. The last gripe I have about this is this check valve right here spews out black stuff that it's just trying to get out of the system. It's condensation, it's just stuff that settles to the bottom. And whatever direction that spout is pointed to, it's just gonna spray the side. The side of my freeze dryer gets it every once in a while. But really the biggest plus of this vacuum pump, and the reason why most people buy it, is they don't have to mess with oil, and that could speak volumes to you. And I'll say this, ever since I've gotten the oilless pump, it's been sitting here, I've been using it for my day-to-day freeze drying, and I haven't switched back to the premium, so that could say something as well. And while we're talking about cost, even though this is a $1,500 upgrade, just like the Premier pump, if you went to buy this pump from the company that makes this pump, it would be much, much more than $1,500. So really, at $1,500, this is a bargain. Even though $1,500 is a lot of money, look up similar pumps that are like this, that are made by this same company, and you'll find that they're at least twice as much as what this $1,500 upgrade is. So there you have it. There's my comparison video for all 3 Harvestright freeze dryer pumps. I hope I was able to answer all your questions. I'm sure that I missed something. If I missed something, feel free to drop me a line in the comments section down below. Join our Facebook or our MeWe groups. There's thousands of freeze dryers on there. If I can't answer something, I can guarantee you someone on there can. If you found the video helpful, do me a huge favor and hit that like button. It helps the YouTube algorithm get this video out to future freeze dryers, fellow freeze dryers, and it really helps the freeze drying community on YouTube. And if you'd like to learn more about freeze drying and see some future videos coming up every Sunday at 8 a.m., subscribe to our channel, Live Life Simple, Retired at 40. You can also go to hundreds of other videos that I've put out, including the ones doing other comparisons of pumps together, and I will put a link to those down in the description. In the meantime, this is Retired at 40, reminding you to live life simple, and we'll catch you next week.